very good evening to you. It's just gone 6 o'clock. It's time for the full view on SABC News. Great to have you with us. And we'll get into your top stories in a little while. First, let's take you to a discussion happening right now virtually. And remember, an ANC delegation landed in crisis-hit Zimbabwe to mediate an end to the crackdown on dissent in Zimbabwe. They met with the ruling party, Zanu-PF, but not with the leadership of the opposition MDC Alliance. Some criticism about that. It is the second time a South African delegation has travelled to Zimbabwe to look at the crisis there. The first delegation sent to Harare in August met only with Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa. South Africa, of course, has been acting as a mediator ever since banned anti-government protests in the country on the 31st of July, during which at least 20 demonstrators were arrested and charged with inciting public violence. Let's cross live now to this Zoom panel discussion on South Africa's role as mediator in the Zimbabwe crisis.
ANC and the Zanu-PF has insisted you only meet, ANC meet only with Zanu-PF, and that's all. And at the level of the state, what are you going to discuss? If you're going to discuss the crisis of the economy, then you've got to address the sources of that crisis. And if Zimbabwe does not admit that it has created part of that crisis through the land appropriation, through running the economy, through corruption and all of that, what then are you going to mediate and who are you going to mediate?
Yeah, but in your view, don't you think there was substantive discussions? You had a whole day between the ANC and Zanu-PF in Harare, and there was a communique issued. We also have been able to glean from witnesses to the dialogue that took place that there were substantial issues discussed, from the issue of the human rights abuses to the threat of ICC over the violence that has taken place over the last 20 years, to an insistence that there's need to attend to the conditions which have led to many Zimbabweans trekking across the Limpopo. So one would argue that the engagement has already started. What the question would be rather, where would this mediation lead to, or this intervention or engagement? Do you think that South Africa, as Eleanor, or certainly more or less Mbeki and Onelina Selwani have been very strong, that perhaps none of the governments in the region, least of all South Africa, has a capacity to be mediator in the Zimbabwean crisis? Do you think that it'd be better to get a mediator from outside the region, Tozi?
The question is whether the ANC or the South African government has any moral authority to mediate, given that it has its own challenges. I mean, the question of, if we talk the economy, the issue of corruption, the issue of the economy having been run down to its knees, the challenges that the ANC government is facing in terms of the land restitution or appropriation without compensation, these are all challenges that Zimbabwe has gone through these, and it has learned the hard way that some of these decisions were wrong. Now, the ANC is going that route also. Now, that's point number one. Number two, the state corruption, the siphoning of state funds by the ruling elite within South Africa. Now, how are you going to advise Zimbabwe to get out of that situation when, in fact, you are getting deeper into it? So for me, I'm saying, what are you going to mediate? First of all, you've got to accept and admit that there is a crisis, and who is responsible for the crisis. If you are creating a dialogue between two parties, there has to be some respect that there's a moral ground within which we've got to deal with these issues. As I'm saying, for me, there is a difficult situation because the Zimbabwean government on the party itself will ask the ANC, what moral authority do you have to tell us what to do?
There's one area which you seem to overlooking, and Tendai Biti raised it, and Eleanor has raised it many times on this platform. The issue of human rights abuses, abductions, right? The presence of the military in everyday life of the country. There's no other country in the region in which there's virtual military rule as there is in Zimbabwe. And I would argue that these two issues, human rights abuses, which have become very, very blatant in our region, in our country rather, because of this is a state on the siege. As Tendai Biti has just said, it's a state which rules by sheer force. Surely it's an issue about which all countries in the region have a moral authority to call Zimbabwe to order. And secondly, the military, which regrettably SADC generally and South Africa in particular blessed a coup. So we have a reality of military rule in Zimbabwe. Therefore, return to constitutionalism is one about which all the region as a whole has a moral authority to demand. And I would argue that these are the two key issues that would be on the table when it came to any mediation whatsoever, whether through South Africa or any other. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, you see, I would agree. I would agree to the extent that if you look at the peer review initiative that was set up over a decade ago, it was supposed to review exactly, in my view, some of these security issues and how the citizens are treated and so forth. But there hasn't been honesty on the part of the regional countries that are supposed to review one another. The reality is that South Africa and Zimbabwe are close neighbors. And there has been what you call silent diplomacy between Zimbabwe and South Africa, or South African silent diplomacy against Zimbabwe. Now, the question you've got to ask is, why now? Why is South Africa decided to intervene at this stage on these issues? Because these issues have been going on for a very long time.
Maybe we should ask Tendai Biti to come in here. Why do you think South Africa has found it rather urgent to come in as they have twice now? Tendai Biti?
No, thank you. Yeah, so firstly, I think that it will be we mustn't underestimate the fact that this regime is not ready for dialogue. For dialogue to take place, there must be an acknowledgement. There must be an acknowledgement of the fact that the status quo is not working. Number two, there must be the existence of a mutual self-hating status quo. It's not there in Zimbabwe at the present moment. The regime, Emmerson's regime, doesn't feel sufficiently incentivized as to demand dialogue. It doesn't feel that its back is against the war to the extent that it sees a salvation in dialogue. President Mugabe felt it in 2008 with the violence, the isolation, the economic meltdown, inflation of 500 billion%. So he knew there was an alternative, and he knew and craved for dialogue. He literally pushed us into dialogue after the stolen election of 30 June 2008. Emmerson doesn't feel that. He actually mistakenly thinks there's no crisis. He actually mistakenly thinks that the economy is on the mend, they're rigging the exchange rates and so forth. Thirdly, to have dialogue, you actually require leadership. Leadership with a vision, leadership that understands how deep and structural the crisis is, and a leadership that will put its citizens first. Emmerson and Zanu will not put Zimbabwe first. They are driven by two agendas. Number one, the power retention agenda, the regime survival agenda. Number two, their bottom line. Zimbabwe is going through massive, unprecedented, corruption. They are stealing billions and billions of dollars since 2017. So there's no incentive, there's no desire, there is no leadership that understands the imperative of dialogue in Zimbabwe. Now, to answer your question specifically, South Africa, to South Africans, Zimbabwe is not a foreign policy, issue. South Africa lives with the mess of Zimbabwe's misgovernance and bad governance. The fingerprints and footprints of Zimbabwe's terrible misrule are there for everyone to see in South Africa. Go to your restaurants, go to your hospitals, go to your police stations. You see the fingerprints of state failure, collapse and vulnerability of Zimbabwe. So we are not a foreign policy issue to South Africans. Therefore, it's in South Africa's own selfish interest to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis, to drive the resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis. The South African economy is limping. Growth rates of less than 1.5%. The South African economy right now is in its worst state in 45 years. And I would submit, and there's data to show that part of the problem is that you are carrying a premium. You are carrying Zimbabwe. You are literally subsidizing, of Zimbabwe. You are literally subsidizing the Zimbabwean, crisis. So there's a selfish motive, and Comrade Deleno, addressed this. There's a selfish motive that why South Africa should intervene. And there are two other factors that are key.
I'll come back to you, Tendai. Moletsi, what's your take on that? What Tendai just said, Moletsi. Moletsi?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Well, what I can say to Tendai is that personally, I'm very suspicious of what the intentions of the South African government are. I know that the South African government, during the last 20 years, one of its major priorities in connection with Zimbabwe was to make sure that a trade union-inspired party like MDC does not win the election and become the government of Zimbabwe. The ANC was opposed to MMD in Zambia and was opposed to MDC in Zimbabwe. And as you can see, they keep talking about these liberation movements, So the ANC is opposed to the new movements that are emerging in the Southern Africa region. They want the old nationalist movements to stay in power for as long as they can. So I will be very, very weary to accept at face value the good intentions of the South African government in its involvement in Zimbabwe. Secondly, the South African government has never said what are South Africa's national interests that are threatened by what is happening in Zimbabwe. They have never said that. Now, the fact that they don't go to the population and say, these are our national interests that are being threatened by what is happening in Zimbabwe shows that actually they don't want us, the population of South Africa, the people of South Africa, to be involved on the side of the people of Zimbabwe and their civil society organizations. They want us to not to be informed. And as I say, you will never hear the South African government explaining to us what interests of South Africa are threatened or are being undermined by what the Zanu-PF government is doing in Zimbabwe. So I'm very weary of the initiative, and I think you have to be very cautious. You have to be very careful not to extrapolate what you think what you yourself think the South African government should be thinking with what the South African government actually is thinking. South African government does not see the migration to South Africa. It values Zanu-PF staying in power, and it would rather pay the cost of the migration to South Africa as long as Zanu-PF stays in power and a civil society-based political party like MDC is kept out of power.
Well, Tendai, I'll come back to you, Tendai. And there's been a lot of talk about the kind of aborted mediation, aborted intervention on the part of the ANC and the South African government. Have there been any contacts between the ANC or the government of South Africa and the MDC Alliance, directly or indirectly, in the last few months? I say so because basically I've always wondered, what is it that the ANC or the South African government want to know about Zimbabwe, which they don't know already, through the statements that the MDC Alliance, people like yourself in particular, almost weekly, have made, placed in the public domain about the condition of the economy, about the human rights situation. Have there been any contacts, my question, any contacts between the ANC and its government and the MDC Alliance and civic society in general, in your knowledge?
At a formal level, no. At a formal level, no. But you must know that we've worked with comrades in the ANC for a long time. Comrades like Lindiwe Zulu, the former Secretary General Gwede Mandashe, now the chairperson, comrades like Vanessa Govenda, comrades like Sidney Mfumadi, Charles Ngakula, during the previous Mark Maharaji during the previous efforts. So we have links. And we are in dialogue at informal platforms all the time. So that's not the issue. But at a formal level, no. But I just want to make 2 points. I hear a comrade Moletsi on his cynical views, if I might, for lack of a better word, on South Africa's motive. I don't dispute that, but I also want to say that during his brother's tenure, during President Mbeki's tenure, there was a genuine desire to see resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis. The only difference, and he is right to say that they are afraid, the ANC has always been afraid of a labor-based movement. The solution proposed was one that chose stability over democracy. But there was a genuine attempt to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis, and one that is born out of the objective self-interest, the objective realization that the Zimbabwean crisis is not a foreign policy issue for South Africa. And one of the things that I want to raise, which is a threat to the region, is that the coup in November 2017 was a game changer. It was a seamless coup, and every general in the region has been studying that coup. The South African generals, including that. So in the Zimbabwean coup is not the coup in Lesotho, it's not the coup in Madagascar. So all these countries in the region would want to coup-proof themselves against the importation of another coup in the region through Zimbabwe. That means that resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis, whether by a solution that favors stability over democracy, or as some of us argue, a genuine solution that recognizes that only the true interests and desires of the people of Zimbabwe matter, is what is critical. So South African interest is long overdue, as it is necessary. The only thing that I want to say is that the South Africans should not be naive. This regime is a rogue regime, a securocratic regime. So South Africa needs to hide behind international law. South Africa needs to hide behind the resolution of SADC, as President Mbeki did in 2007. Faced with the Zimbabwean crisis, President Mbeki forced the calling of an extraordinary summit on SADC, which was held in Dar es Salaam on the 29th of March 2007. So President Mbeki needs to hide behind the regionalism, the Southern African Development Community or the African Union, which he currently chairs. If he tries to force a bilateral attempt, he'll be faced with the answers that his two delegations have made, the party delegation and the government delegation. President Ramaphosa needs to be streetwise.
All right, and that's where we'll leave that discussion underway, a virtual discussion about the role of South Africa, how it's best placed to deal with the Zimbabwean crisis. So we were hearing there from the Vice President of the MDC Alliance, Tendai Biti, and many members of the MDC, the opposition, believe that South Africa has a really important role in bringing the government in check, saying that this is a rogue regime, as you heard. Moletsi Mbeki, the South African analyst, author and entrepreneur, also talking about South Africa's role, but saying he suspected that the South Africans prefer Zanu-PF in power at great cost. So questioning the motives of South Africa as a mediator there.